Hey guys, welcome back to Boring History Episodes. Tonight, we're not talking about battles won or empires built. We're not diving into the stories of warlords and their crowns. Instead, we're stepping into the darkness of history, where power wasn't just a matter of victory, but of cruelty, unimaginable and unfathomable. This isn't the glory of the Mongol conquests. This is the shadowy side, the one that makes your skin crawl, where Genghis Khan's thirst for domination didn't just break cities, but destroyed lives in ways that still haunt the pages of history. Tonight, we'll be unraveling the most brutal methods Genghis Khan used, torture so severe it crossed every line of humanity and went too far, even by the standards of his own time. Imagine this. It's the early 1200s. The air is thick with the smell of dust and smoke. Genghis Khan, the Great Khan, commands an empire that stretches across vast lands, his reach endless. But his power is not just built on armies and battles, it's built on terror. As his troops descend upon cities, they bring with them not just swords and arrows, but methods of torture that would leave the strongest trembling. No one is safe. Not the men, not the women, not even the children. Every act of defiance is met with a punishment far worse than death itself. This is the world we step into tonight. A world where pain becomes a message, where fear is a weapon and mercy is forgotten. You're waking up now, the cold, unforgiving floor beneath you, the faint smell of iron in the air, blood or metal, you can't tell which. Your limbs feel heavy, stiff, but you force yourself to stand. You step outside. The wind howls across the empty streets, a sense of dread creeping in your bones. A figure in the distance, his silhouette unmistakable. The Khan's flag, the symbol of relentless conquest. You touch your clothes, worn and torn by war. Today, something darker is coming. If you're ready to step into this chilling chapter of history, and explore the horrors that shape the legacy of one of the greatest conquerors, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Where are you joining us from tonight? Drop a comment below. Let's see how far this darkness travels. Now, dim the lights. Let the world outside fade away. Take a deep breath in. Feel the weight of the past settle in as the shadows of history wrap around you. Close your eyes for a moment. Can you hear the quiet murmur of an empire built on fear? The whispers of those who fell under Genghis Khan's rule, and the screams that still echo in the silence. Now picture this. The year is 1220. You stand before the gates of a city, the last stand before the Mongol onslaught. You can feel the tremors of war beneath your feet. And as the Khan's army closes in, you realize one thing. The terror awaiting you will not just break your body, it will break your spirit. The line between conqueror and monster blurs. Genghis Khan was a master of war, but it wasn't just his battle tactics that made him feared. His genius lay in his ability to play with the mind, to manipulate fear, to break a person's will before the sword ever had to strike. One of his most dreaded strategies was the siege starvation tactic, a method so psychologically devastating that it was designed not only to conquer, but to humiliate and crush the soul of an entire city. Imagine yourself for a moment standing at the gates of a city, watching as the last remaining rays of sunlight slip behind the horizon. The streets, once bustling with life, now echo with silence. No market calls, no children's laughter. The food stores are empty. You'd think the worst was over, but then you see them, his soldiers, silent and still, surrounding your city, cutting off all escape, sealing your fate. Inside the city, a silence hung heavy, as if the very air itself was holding its breath. The bread, once a staple of daily life, had turned to dust, dry, crumbling, barely recognizable as the nourishment it once was. The rats, those scurrying scavengers of every city, had disappeared. Perhaps even they, in their small, cunning ways, had realized that there was nothing left to feast on. No scraps, no leftovers. Only the stillness that followed the hunger. And then, the dead. In the corners, in the alleyways, on the very streets where children once played, the bodies lay, not forgotten, not mourned, just waiting, waiting for the inevitable. Their silent fate was not to rest in peace, but to be quietly consumed by those still alive, driven by the gnawing need for survival. It was a reality so cruel, so raw, it could break even the strongest spirit. In 1219, when Genghis Khan, with the weight of his empire behind him, set his sights on the Khwarezmian Empire, he didn't rush in with a roar of war drums and the clash of swords. No, that would have been too quick, too predictable. Instead, he did what only a true tactician would do. He surrounded the great city of Nishapur, slowly, quietly. As the walls of the city stood tall, unwavering, Genghis Khan's army didn't force their way in. They didn't need to. They waited. They waited as the citizens within those walls began to feel it, the creeping, insidious realization that they were not only being besieged by soldiers, but by the slow, relentless force of starvation. The Mongols knew something that the defenders did not. You don't need to break down walls to bring a city to its knees. You simply wait for the hunger to do the work for you. The city, once bustling with life, was now a quiet shell of itself. And as the siege dragged on, with no hope of relief in sight, the walls, so strong, so imposing, became nothing more than a faint memory of what had once been. The Mongols didn't need to break through them. The people inside had already begun to crumble from within. And so, the silence of the city was broken, not by the clash of steel, but by the soft, desperate sounds of survival. The people, their bodies weak, their minds breaking under the pressure of hunger and despair, did what they had to do, what they were forced to do. And in the stillness, Genghis Khan knew. He had already won. This wasn't just a siege. It was a waiting game, a cruel one. A test of endurance that stripped away your dignity before it even touched your body. Genghis Khan knew something most generals did not. It was never just about the physical. It was about breaking the will. The body might withstand for a while, but the mind could be crushed much sooner. The tactic itself was simple. The Mongols didn't charge in immediately, blades swinging. No, they surrounded the city. They cut off all food and water supplies. No more grains, no more livestock, no more fresh water to drink. The city, once thriving, became a prison. The residents had nowhere to run, no reinforcements to expect, and no hope for help. The days turned to weeks, and the weeks stretched into months. At first, the hunger pangs would be nothing more than a dull ache, a minor discomfort. But that feeling would grow, slowly at first, but eventually gnawing at you, clawing inside, making you think of food when there was none, dreaming of sustenance when your body was long past its limits. And then it happens. The first casualty isn't the body, it's the spirit. The people of the city, once defiant, once proud, begin to turn on each other. The desperation sets in. They begin to eat what they can find, or rather, what they can bear to consume. The dead, the rats, anything. For survival, yes, but also to shatter whatever remained of their dignity. The hunger, physical and psychological, became their new enemy. When you're starving, you begin to break down in ways you never thought possible. You stop thinking about survival as something noble. It becomes an animal instinct, a basic, primal need. The defenders of the city, once strong, once willing to fight to the last breath, now look at one another with suspicion, fear, and perhaps even a bit of shame. And with each passing day, the Mongol commander knew they were closer to victory. Because the mind is the first thing to break, long before the body. It was no longer about breaking walls or climbing battlements. It was about the slow decay of a people, stripped of their hope, their dignity, and their spirit. But you know what's crueler than that? The fact that it was all planned. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an accident. The Mongols didn't just want to conquer, they wanted to break. They wanted to force submission from within. When people are starving, they don't just beg for food. They beg for mercy, for the sweet release of death. Because sometimes, death seems like a far kinder alternative than the slow, endless gnaw of hunger. And so, the first cracks in the city's defenses weren't made with a sword. They were made with hunger. Now it wasn't just the body that gave up. The minds of those inside the city began to fray. The siege starvation tactic was working its magic. But there's more to this twisted game than simply watching a city starve. Because, at the heart of it, Genghis Khan wasn't just attacking a place. He was attacking the very concept of hope itself. When people begin to eat the dead, when the walls of a city are no longer defined by stone, but by desperation, that's when the mind begins to break in ways that words cannot capture. It becomes a psychological death, a death that comes long before the body gives in. Imagine being the one trapped inside, watching as your fellow citizens slowly begin to falter. The children, the elderly, the strong, the weak, they all feel it, each in their own way. They lose their sense of identity, their sense of community. They start to wonder if it's worth it to hold out any longer. Or perhaps even worse, they start to wonder if they even can. Genghis Khan knew that it wasn't just the body that needed to fall. The spirit had to go first. And once that was gone, the city was his, whether the gates opened or not. In the end, it wasn't the Mongol soldiers who conquered the city. It was the hunger that wore down its defenders. The Mongols left nothing to chance. They didn't need to. When you can make the very idea of survival feel like torment, you don't need to strike with force. You simply need to watch and wait. Wait for the inevitable collapse. And when that collapse happens, it's not just a surrender. It's the final, shattering moment when a person admits, perhaps to themselves, perhaps to the enemy, that they cannot endure the torment any longer. Their will has been crushed, their bodies hollow shells of their former selves, and they give up. Not because they're beaten in battle, but because they're beaten by their own minds. Cut to that moment, the city, once proud, now reduced to a ghost. The gates open, not from a forceful charge, but from a whispered surrender, a plea for release from a torment that had been much worse than any battle. And as the Mongols poured in, they didn't just conquer a city, they conquered the idea of what it meant to resist. A city's walls can crumble, but the human spirit? That's a much harder thing to break. Unless, of course, you let starvation do it first. The sun dips low over the horizon, casting an eerie glow on the conquered lands as the city you once called home lies in ruins, its gates open, its people scattered and broken. And now you stand, waiting, watching as the Mongol horde moves in, their eyes cold and their purpose clear. Victory has a cost, and with every victory, something darker follows, like the shadow of a storm just before it rains. It wasn't enough to conquer the land, to break through the walls and watch cities crumble. No, Genghis Khan had a different prize in mind, one that wasn't just about land or riches, but about control, about erasing what had once been and reshaping it under his rule. After the sack of Bukhara in 1220, as the fires smouldered and the last cries faded into the dust, the Mongols began their grim work. Thousands of women and girls, once free, now found themselves caught in the aftermath, their futures no longer their own. No, now they were simply spoils, the ones who had survived the slaughter, just barely, gathered up like cattle, like possessions. The wind rustles through the empty streets as the soldiers march onward, the sound of their boots echoing against the silent city walls. The air is thick with tension, charged with the anticipation of what's to come. Yet, among the sounds of war, there's something quieter, something more chilling. The women. They stand in line, their faces a mixture of fear and uncertainty, each one waiting their turn in a twisted parade. These are not women of power or status. They are not queens or daughters of noble houses. No, they are the captured, the broken, the spoils of conquest, lined up like animals ready for auction. One by one, they are paraded before the Mongol commanders, their fate decided in the cold, calculating gaze of the men who stand before them. Their value is determined not by their skill, their wisdom, or their spirit, but by their appearance, their age, and their social class. The higher the beauty, the higher the rank. And in this world, beauty is no gift. It's a curse. Imagine the feeling, the eyes of powerful men, hardened by war and victory, studying every inch of your body, not with the warmth of affection, but with the coldness of possession. They rank you, place you on a scale, deciding your worth not based on who you are, but what you can offer. Your beauty, your youth, is your curse. The older women, their faces marked by time, are cast aside, deemed less valuable, less worthy, and the younger ones, the beautiful ones, are prized, hoarded, reserved for the highest ranks. But this is not admiration, it is possession. Beauty in this world becomes a weapon. For the women, there is no escape, no sanctuary. The world has reduced them to mere objects, things to be claimed and used. Their bodies, nothing more than trophies in a game of power and control. The beauty that was once a gift, a reflection of youth and vitality, is now a commodity. It is used to fuel alliances, to cement relationships between conquerors, to solidify the empire's dominance. And yet this beauty, this once cherished quality, becomes a prison. For the women who stand before these men, it is a prison of their own making. Their worth is no longer measured by their kindness, their intellect, or their strength. It is measured by how young they look, how desirable they are. The older women, those whose beauty has faded with time, are left to the soldiers, to those who are desperate for a reminder of what once was. Their beauty is gone, and with it, their value. In this world, beauty doesn't free you, it traps you. Now imagine the soldiers who witness this, the men who stand at the edge of this parade, their eyes scanning the women with the precision of soldiers preparing for battle. They too are not looking for what makes a woman whole. They are not looking for a person. No, they are looking for a prize, a trophy. And the higher your beauty, the more coveted you become. It's not a question of who you are. It's a question of what you can do for them. The Mongols did not prize beauty for its softness or its grace. They did not see these women as potential partners or companions. No. They saw them as tools. Tools to cement their power, to strengthen their position, to claim dominance over the land. The higher a woman's rank, the more valuable she was to the empire. And yet, for all their value, they were no more than objects to be moved around the board. Beauty, then, becomes something far darker than most of us would ever imagine. It becomes a means of control, a method of asserting power. For the women who stood before the Mongol commanders, beauty was no longer a gift of nature, but a burden. It was a reminder of their powerlessness, their inability to escape a world that had reduced them to nothing more than prizes to be given away, sold and exchanged. In the end, beauty didn't make them desired, it made them disposable. And then, as if it were a well-rehearsed dance, they were distributed among the soldiers, handed out as rewards for services rendered. The higher the rank, the more prestigious the captives. The Mongol commanders, those whose names would be whispered for centuries, claimed the most beautiful, the most noble, as though they were treasures to be possessed, as though their very existence could be folded into the empire's ever-growing tapestry. It wasn't just about desire. It was about dominance. The lower-ranking soldiers, those whose names would fade into obscurity, received women of a lesser standing, those who had once been commoners, peasants, women whose stories would be forgotten, whose lives would be reshaped into something unrecognizable. They became mere instruments of the empire, their identities erased, their futures dictated by those who held power. You would think, after all the bloodshed, the destruction, the violence, that they would stop. But they don't. They never do. Genghis Khan's conquest wasn't just about the land. It was about dominance in every sense of the word. The men, the cities, the cultures, and yes, even the women. Captured women who once carried the essence of their homes, their traditions, and their lives are now no more than pieces of a prize, divided among the victors. Imagine for a moment what it must have been like to be one of them. The women who were taken, broken not only by the fall of their cities, but by the hands of the men who now controlled them. When the Mongols stormed a city, they didn't just claim the riches or the land, they took the very soul of it. And the women, well, they were the ultimate trophy. They didn't get to keep their names, their identities, their pasts. No, they were stripped of that. Their worth, it was measured by how many soldiers they could serve, how many lords they could please, how many leaders they could appease. Women of noble blood were spared from this fate in a way. They were given to the highest commanders, the ones who were meant to carry the power of the empire forward. But even they, those who had once stood proudly in the courts of kings and the halls of power, were now nothing more than tokens of victory. Their fate, to be used, to be paraded, to be paralyzed by the weight of what they had lost. First their homes, then their freedom, and ultimately, their voice. For those of lesser standing, the fate was even more grim. The soldiers, those fierce Mongol warriors who had fought hard for their conquest, were quick to claim their share. A woman's value was now a commodity, passed from one hand to another, with little regard for who she was, what she had been, or what she could have been. It didn't matter. In the eyes of the Mongols, she was no longer a person, she was property. The Mongol horde didn't just sack cities, they sacked lives. But there's a deeper layer to this than just taking the women as spoils. It wasn't just about the physical violation, it was a political statement. To take the women of a defeated enemy was to destroy their legacy, to erase their heritage, and to rob them of something far more precious than land. You see, in ancient cultures, women were not just figures of affection, they were symbols. They carried with them the essence of the family, the name, the bloodline. When Genghis Khan's soldiers took these women, it was more than just a defeat. It was an obliteration of everything that the enemy had ever stood for. To take a noble woman, to strip her of her identity, to force her into servitude or submission, this was to erase an entire culture, to rob them of their past, to erase their history. This wasn't about conquest in the traditional sense. No, it was far more personal. The women of the cities they conquered were not only physically taken, they were made into tools, turned into commodities that could be used to solidify Mongol power. The worst part? They were often forced to forget who they were. Their names were erased, their identities rewritten. They became nothing more than cogs in the vast machine of Genghis Khan's empire. In the end, they weren't just prisoners. They were erasures. And let's talk about the mindset behind this. The Mongols didn't just capture these women for pleasure or luxury. No, they took them for a far more calculated reason. This wasn't just about personal gain. It was a strategic move. You see, by taking these women, By forcing them into submission and stripping them of their pasts, the Mongols were sending a message. They were telling the defeated people that nothing was sacred, not their homes, not their culture, and certainly not their women. To have your women taken was to have your very identity ripped from you. The women became a symbol of their defeat, a tangible reminder of what they had lost. And what's more, these women were not just left to rot away in the Mongol camps. They were turned into instruments of control, tools that could be used to manipulate power. Some were married off to Mongol commanders, solidifying alliances. Others were made to serve, to bear children, to continue the lineage of the empire. The women weren't just captured, they were repurposed, reshaped to serve the empire's needs, erasing whatever remnants of their former lives had once existed. It wasn't just the women who were enslaved, it was their entire history, and you might wonder, wasn't there any compassion in all of this? But the answer, unfortunately, is no. Compassion wasn't something Genghis Khan had much use for. To him, the women weren't even human. They were tools, commodities, pawns in a much larger game. It wasn't about respect. It wasn't even about war. It was about power. The Mongols took these women not just as prizes, but as a demonstration of their strength, their control, and their absolute dominance. In their eyes, the women's worth was no longer measured by their ability to love, to nurture, or to carry on a family line. No, they were now measured by their capacity to submit, to serve, and to build the power of an empire that had already proved itself unstoppable. And so, in the end, the women were not just enslaved. They were rewritten into a new history, one where their identity was erased, their voices silenced. But the reality is that history is never so simple. The women, no matter how much their names were erased, left marks. They were not merely pieces to be moved around a board. They were people. And though their stories may have been buried, erased by the conquerors, they continue to echo in the shadows, reminders of what was stolen and what still persists, even in the quiet spaces where history tries to forget. Under the darkened sky, the city's once bustling streets are now eerily quiet, the fires having long since burned down to smouldering embers, with the clatter of iron boots on cobblestones being the only sound that remains. But this is not the sound of victory, not yet. It's the sound of something darker, something more calculated, something that doesn't just conquer land, it conquers the very soul of a people. The sun hung low in the sky, casting an ominous red glow over the battlefield as the Mongol forces arrived, and with them came the heavy silence of impending doom. But there was something different about this march. It wasn't just the pounding of hooves or the rattling of swords. It was the human line, a macabre procession moving slowly toward the enemy's defenses. These were not soldiers, not warriors, not men hardened by years of battle. These were civilians, captives taken from towns recently conquered. Men, women, and children. Those who had once known the comfort of their homes, now forced into a nightmare that would strip them of their dignity, their lives, and their humanity. Their bodies, those fragile vessels of life, now had a single purpose: to march ahead of the Mongol army, directly into the line of fire. It was a tactic as cruel as it was effective. The Mongols didn't just rely on brute force to break their enemies. No, they understood the psychological weight of war. The captured civilians were not just shields. They were the first wave of the Mongol assault, pushed to the front lines with no weapons, no armor, and no way of defending themselves. They were not soldiers, they were tools, tools to wear down the enemy's resolve. The Mongols have arrived, and Genghis Khan's army moves like a silent wave, sweeping through the landscape, consuming everything in its path. It's not just the soldiers who advance under the Mongol banner. No, it's something much more unsettling that leads them forward, a line of people. These are not fighters, They are not warriors. They are the old, the sick, the weak. They are women, children, and the elderly, those who should have been hidden in the depths of the city's defenses. Instead, they march forward, caught in the cruel game of war, the first to bear the brunt of the enemy's weapons. These are human shields. The Mongols, with their brutal genius, have perfected a tactic that turns the very essence of humanity into a weapon. As the enemy forces look on, they see not just Mongol warriors, but the faces of the innocents, the helpless, those who had no part in the conflict. The soldiers cannot help but hesitate. They cannot strike without consequence. To shoot an arrow, to draw their sword, means to strike the unarmed, to kill the defenseless. The Mongols knew this, and they used it against them. Imagine it. The tension in the air is palpable, thick enough to taste. You are one of those enemy soldiers, standing on the front lines. You've fought many battles. You know how to face death, how to wield your weapon, but this is different. The Mongols are not just attacking with their usual fury, they are using people. They are using human lives to force your hand, to make you feel the weight of your actions. And so, you hesitate, you pause, for just a moment, but that moment is all the Mongols need. For in that brief instant, the women and children are exposed. The first volley of arrows flies, not aimed at soldiers, but at those who had no choice in this war. The screams that follow, the cries of the innocent, ripple through the air like a silent echo. The Mongols are not just protecting their soldiers, they are sending a message so clear it shatters the very foundation of the enemy's resolve. This is the price of defiance. This is what happens when you refuse to surrender. Your people, your families, will be the first to suffer. And in that suffering, the enemy will be forced to make a choice. Fight and lose everything, or surrender and live with the shame of knowing that they had no choice but to submit. The true power of this tactic is not in the physical destruction it causes. It's in the psychological warfare it inflicts. The Mongols understood something crucial about human nature. Fear, not just of death, but of loss. Loss of family, loss of loved ones. The soldiers didn't just fear dying. They feared having to kill those they could not protect. This is the genius of Genghis Khan's strategy. He didn't just break his enemies with force. He broke them with the fear of loss, of watching their own people be sacrificed in front of them. The Mongols were not just fighting to conquer. They were fighting to destroy the very will to resist. And by placing these human shields in front of them, they took away the enemy's ability to choose. There was no longer a choice between life and death. There was only the inevitable realization that to resist was to condemn their own to death. To submit was the only way to protect those they loved. And in this simple, terrible choice, the Mongols knew they had already won. It wasn't the sharpness of the Mongol blades that broke the enemy. It was the coldness of the Mongol mind. Now, let's consider the human side of this. What did it mean for the captives, the women, children, and elderly forced to march in front of the Mongol army? These were not soldiers. They were civilians, people who had lived their lives away from the horrors of war. But in the chaos of conquest, they were turned into something else. They became instruments, pawns in a game, much larger than they could comprehend. Their lives, their futures, were no longer their own. They were, for all intents and purposes, human shields, nothing more than a tool to be used and discarded. Can you imagine the terror, the confusion, to be thrust into the front of a battle you never asked for, to become the first line of defense not for your own people but for your enemies? These women and children, these elderly citizens, what were they to do? To run would mean death. To fight would be pointless. So they walked, slow and steady, eyes wide with fear, knowing they were being used to break the very will of the enemy. Their fate wasn't just sealed by the enemy's arrows. It was sealed by their very humanity. But the real kicker in all of this, the truly dark irony, is that the Mongols weren't just using these human shields to protect their soldiers. They were using them as a psychological tool to force their enemies into submission. The soldiers, facing this cruel spectacle, had no choice but to hesitate. And in that hesitation, they lost their resolve. It wasn't the Mongols who killed them. It was their own doubt, their own reluctance to harm the innocent. And as the battle raged on, the message was clear. The Mongols didn't need to win through force alone. They had already won by breaking their enemy's will, by forcing them to face the horror of what would happen if they didn't surrender. The Mongols understood this truth. The greatest victory is not one that's won with a sword. It's one that's won with fear. In the end, it wasn't the Mongol swords that broke the enemy's spirit. It was the Mongol mind. So, as the dust settles and the battle is won, remember this. The Mongols didn't just conquer lands. They conquered hearts and minds. They didn't just break walls. They broke the very will to resist. And all it took was a few human shields and the cold, calculating genius of a warlord who understood the true nature of power. Under the ashen sky, the aftermath of the battle settles like a heavy cloak over the land, the cries of the fallen having long since faded into the silence, leaving only the occasional crackle of dying embers to break the stillness. The Mongols, having emerged victorious once again, stand unshaken, their conquest complete. But this time, it's not a regular victory. This time, the methods of execution take on a different, more chilling form, a form that speaks not just to their power, but to their absolute dominance over life and death. The battle for the city of Kalka was brutal, but it was the aftermath that would haunt the survivors. The Mongol generals, having subdued the Russian forces, did not rush to simply kill the captured leaders. No, they chose a more deliberate and excruciating form of death, one that would make a statement to anyone who dared to resist them in the future. This was not an execution born of rage or a thirst for vengeance. It was cold, calculated, and above all, theatrical. It was death by weight. Captured nobles, those who had once held power, pride, and respect, found themselves lying beneath a large wooden board. The Mongol generals, having claimed their victory, now claimed their victims, not with the sharp edge of a sword, but with the heavy, oppressive force of their own bodies. They sat, they ate, they drank, and beneath them, the noble prisoners, those who had once led armies, commanded cities, and shaped nations, died slowly and painfully beneath the weight of the Mongol commanders. Imagine, for a moment, what it must have been like to be one of those captured nobles. Your body, once strong and proud, now lies beneath a wooden board, pinned there by the very men who had conquered you. You can feel the weight pressing down on your chest, the pressure building with each passing second. The Mongol generals above you are unfazed, chatting casually among themselves as they enjoy their food, their drinks, their feast, while you slowly suffocate beneath them. This method of execution wasn't just about death. It was about the power of presence, the power of control. It was a deliberate act of dehumanization. The Mongols didn't need to spill blood to prove their superiority. They didn't need to draw swords or axes. All they needed was the sheer weight of their authority. And in this slow, suffocating manner of killing, they sent a message that would echo through the annals of history. The nobles beneath the board didn't die immediately. No, this was no swift execution. The Mongols were in no hurry. The generals took their time, making sure that the prisoners beneath them suffered for as long as possible. The slow, inevitable crushing of their bodies was a reminder, one that they would never forget, that they were no longer in control. It was a message to all who would dare oppose Genghis Khan. This is what happens when you defy us. This is the price you pay for standing against the might of the Mongol Empire. It's a death without blood, but not without meaning. The brilliance of this execution was not just in its cruelty, but in its psychological impact. The Mongols, ever the masters of terror, understood that fear was more than just physical pain. They knew that breaking the mind was just as powerful, if not more so, than breaking the body. To kill with weight, to kill slowly, to make a victim aware of every moment of their suffering, was to break them in ways that no sword or arrow ever could. For the Mongol generals, this was not just an execution. It was an exhibition of dominance, an assertion of power that transcended mere physical strength. They were not simply killing their enemies. They were showing them the vast, unbridgeable gap between the rulers and the ruled. The Mongols, with their slow, deliberate cruelty, proved something. They could destroy not only the body, but the spirit, and in that destruction, they cemented their rule. The Mongols weren't just conquerors, they were artists of fear. And as the final breath is drawn beneath the weight of the Mongol generals, one must wonder, what was it like to be the last noble, the one who lingered longer than the rest? To feel the pressure building, the suffocation coming closer with each passing moment, knowing there was no escape, no relief. With every breath, you realize that you are nothing now, nothing but a tool for someone else's power. Your life a mere afterthought in a game much larger than yourself. In a way, the generals didn't just kill their prisoners, they erased them. The nobles beneath the board were not just deprived of their lives, they were deprived of their dignity, their legacy, their humanity. They were reduced to nothing more than bodies, crushed by the weight of Mongol might. And with every breath they lost, with every second they suffered, the Mongols proved their supremacy, not just over their enemies, but over life itself. In the end, the Mongols didn't just kill their enemies, they made them disappear. But it doesn't end with the nobles. No, the Mongols' message had to be clear. It had to be felt. Their enemies had to know what would happen if they defied them. And so, the brutality of this execution wasn't just about the nobles who died beneath the weight of the generals. It was about sending a message to everyone who would hear of it, everyone who would ever consider standing in the way of Mongol conquest. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about terror. It was about making sure that no one would ever forget the cost of opposing Genghis Khan. The Mongols didn't need to kill thousands to prove their power. They didn't need to shed rivers of blood. They needed only a few bodies, a few moments of suffocating terror, to show the world who was truly in control. And as the last of the nobles met their slow end beneath the weight of Mongol rule, the message was clear. This was the price of resistance. This was the price of defiance. And the Mongols had no mercy to offer. Sometimes, the weight of power isn't felt by the sword. It's felt in the silence of the body breaking beneath it. So, as the Mongols walked away from the scene, the bodies of their enemies crushed underfoot, they knew something profound. They had not only won the battle, they had won the mind. The fear that lingered in the air, the weight of their dominance, was enough to ensure that no one would dare rise against them again. Because in this world, power isn't just about strength, it's about control. And the Mongols, with their slow, deliberate cruelty, had mastered it entirely. The air is thick with tension, and you can feel it in the way the dust clings to the soles of your boots, how the wind stirs the dry earth in the distance, as though the land itself holds its breath. The Mongol camp is alive with the buzz of soldiers preparing for another day of conquest. But amidst this routine, there is a moment of silence, a moment of anticipation, the kind of silence that speaks of something impending, something dangerous. And then you see him, the traitor. His hands are bound, his head down, and his steps falter under the weight of the crowd's gaze. A man who once stood among the Mongols, one who had sworn loyalty, now facing the ultimate price for his betrayal. It's not a swift death, nor a quiet one. The Mongols have a special way of dealing with those who break their word, especially those who turn their backs on the empire. The punishment is simple, but brutal. The traitor is tied by his wrists and dragged behind a horse, his body scraping the dirt as the horse gallops on. It's not just an execution, it's a statement. The ground beneath him feels like jagged rocks, each scrape a reminder of what happens to those who betray the Mongol Empire. The harsh reality of this punishment isn't in the finality of death, but in the slow, humiliating process of the journey toward it. You watch, and you can't help but notice the irony. A man who once walked proudly among the Mongols, now reduced to this. The very dirt he once marched over now holds him down, pulls him apart. His face, once full of arrogance, now twisted in agony, is no longer a symbol of power, but a symbol of weakness. His body is dragged mercilessly, each moment an eternity, each second a reminder of what he has lost. The Mongols understand something few others do. Power isn't just about victory, it's about control. It's about sending a message that no one can ignore. This punishment isn't for the traitor alone. No, it's for everyone who watches. It's a lesson. Betrayal has consequences, and those who dare to defy the Mongol Empire will pay a price far worse than death. This is no quiet affair. This is not a death in the shadows. It is public. It is loud. It is meant to be seen, to be felt, and it works. The onlookers know that this could be their fate too. One wrong move, one wrong word, and they too could be dragged behind a horse, their dignity ripped away, their pride shattered. The Mongols do not just execute their traitors, they make examples of them. And in this example, there is no mercy. There is no quick end. There is no relief. The Mongols didn't just punish traitors, they made sure you never forgot the lesson. But it's not just about the traitor. It's about the fear it instills in those who watch. The Mongols didn't need to use a sword or an axe to execute this man. No. All they needed was time. Time, and the slow, agonizing process of dragging a man's life away in front of those who dared to question their loyalty. The Mongols knew the power of the mind. It's not just the physical pain of being dragged behind a horse. It's the mental torture, the knowing that your time is limited, that each second is another step closer to your end, that your life has no more value than the dirt beneath you. And as the traitor's body is dragged through the dust, something shifts in the crowd. They feel it too, the weight of what they've just witnessed. The message has been sent. Betrayal will not be tolerated. Loyalty is not a suggestion, it's a demand. And the punishment for disobedience is not just death. It's a death that will break you before it kills you. In the Mongol world, treason wasn't just punished, it was savored. Now let's step back and think about the deeper meaning here. This isn't just about punishing one man for his betrayal. It's about controlling an empire, controlling a people through fear, through the constant reminder that disloyalty will never go unpunished. The Mongols understood something crucial. In order to maintain power, you must create fear, and in order to create fear, you must make the punishment unforgettable. This is no ordinary execution. This is public humiliation, a slow degradation of the human spirit, and a reminder to everyone watching that the Mongol Empire is not to be trifled with. The Mongols didn't just want to kill traitors. They wanted to destroy the very concept of betrayal. By dragging these men behind horses, by making them endure every second of humiliation and pain, they sent a message to their entire empire. This wasn't just about retribution. It was about control, about making sure that no one ever thought of crossing them again. After all, why settle for a quiet death when you can make the whole world watch? And as the last breath escapes the traitor's body, the message is clear, not just to the ones left standing, but but to anyone who might consider disloyalty in the future. The price of betrayal is not only your life, but your dignity, your soul. The Mongols did not kill traitors quickly. They made sure you felt every second of your wrong choice. The traitor is now a forgotten name, his body left behind as the Mongols march on, their empire growing ever stronger. But the lesson lingers, not just in the minds of the soldiers who watched, but in the hearts of anyone who dares to question the might of the Mongol Empire. In the end, the traitor doesn't just die, he disappears, and the empire continues, undisturbed. In the Mongol world, the punishment for betrayal is simple. It's slow, it's humiliating, and it's unforgettable. And in the minds of those who survive it, the fear of betrayal becomes as real as the very ground they walk on. The night settles around us, quiet, peaceful. We've walked through the darkness, through the shadows of a time long past, and the echo of Mongol hooves fades, but the weight of their power lingers. A faint breeze stirs the stillness. Perhaps it's the sound of time itself, whispering its secrets to the stars. The flickering light of distant fires now feels so far away. You can almost hear the soft creak of ancient wood, as if a door is gently closing. The world of Genghis Khan, his empire built on terror and conquest, now softly fades into the past. We return to the present, quiet, calm. The silence is warm, familiar. The journey through history has ended, but the echoes remain. If this journey through time has touched you, if the whispers of history have lingered in your mind, let us know. A simple like, a share, or a gentle subscribe, and together we'll continue to walk through the past. The stories, the echoes, the moments that shape our world. They're waiting for us to uncover them, one step at a time. Join us again, and let's explore the hidden corners of history. Goodbye, and we will meet again.